Welcome to the Western Baul Podcast Series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Making the Work Your Own. The talk was given by Fedorschak on July 5th, 2025 via Zoom. Vijay is the organizer of the Western Baul Podcast Series and the author of The Shadow on the Path and Father and Son. In this talk, Vijay refers to the work not only as a system taught by Gurdjieff, but also, in a broader way, as the process of transformation in different traditions or streams of the great work. He observes that both effort and surrender are needed on real paths. Vijay notes that if we simply admire those who have served the work in the traditions, we will not take responsibility for it or be able to realize its possibility. He discusses aspects of spiritual work that we can come to make our own, which have been taught by the French master Arnaud Desjardins and written about by American master Lee Lozowick in the book Words of Fire and Faith. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Vijay Fedorschak.
Making the work your own. I want to start with a teaching of my teacher, Lee Lozowick. He spoke about it toward the end of his life. Live and learn. This imperative is designed within us to live and learn. It comes very naturally to children by instinct and survival. And it's how we accomplish everything, walking, talking, everything that comes to us, pretty much. It's just a natural part of being a human being. And it starts really early. I saw this video today. I had seen something like this before of a baby who is a few hours old. I think it was 6 hours old in the one I previously saw. This one, I'm not sure how many hours old the baby was, but they can see apparently a very short distance right from birth, pretty much. 8 to 12 inches out or so. They can see a mother's face when nursing. And in this video, the mom was sticking her tongue out. For anyone listening to the podcast, I'm sticking my tongue out now. And remarkably, the baby starts doing the same thing. And in this other video that I had seen, it was a father who pursed his lips, went like that. And the baby did that as well. We are hardwired to live and learn. And we're innately curious. You might think back to things that you were personally consumed by, engrossed in when you were a kid. For periods of time, I was fascinated by butterflies. I lived in a housing project, but outside that were the woods. And there was a whole field where monarchs, we called it monarch paradise, would congregate. And it just blew my mind. I was in awe as a child. And for whatever reason, I got into coin collecting, pennies, when I was a kid. And my grandfather used to find pennies on the ground and give them to me. Whenever he'd find one, I'd put them in my coin collection. And these things last short periods of time. But we learned something from the world as children in everything that we do. And then kids learn from older kids. I go to the YMCA, to the gym down here, and I'm walking to the gym after parking my car, and there's a daycare center right adjacent to it. And there's all these kids, just a gaggle of kids, just having a party, doing what kids do. They're talking real loud and running around and kicking things. And it's really quite beautiful. And then I see 3 or 4 kids looking through a fence. What are they looking at? And they're looking at these older kids walking by, these teenagers, fairly young teenagers. And I just got the sense that they're learning about what they're going to be, how it's going to be for them. It seems that at some point, and I don't think that there's one demarcated time when we stop doing this instinctually, but we abandon that freedom and instinctual way of living and learning, I think, and develop habits about how to be. Maybe because of the messages that we receive in our families, from the culture. I'm not getting down on anybody. My parents knew what they knew and were teaching me as best that they could. But it wasn't about keeping open to what comes to me and allowing my instincts to guide me so much. It was more about, this is how to be, to stay secure and to make it in this world. So I think we probably shut it down, maybe not completely. I wouldn't think completely, but to a large extent, because we don't receive unconditional love and wise guidance as kids. I never learned to use tools. And when I think about that, I think about how after we moved out of the projects to a little house across the street, my father had a place where he kept all his tools. And I just never wanted to go in there. I knew that my dad would be telling me what to do, and I just did not want to be controlled. I just stayed away from that. And I never learned some things that would have been really good for me to learn. But I didn't really know any better, and neither did my dad. I did learn a lot of things from him, but I kept my distance. And I never learned how to cook. Well, being a boy child at that time, in that generation, boys didn't do that so much. That was what girls did. And I didn't learn to take risks so much. It was more about how to keep things solid and safe. So we adopt a view of the world and of ourselves as a way of surviving in the world that we grow up in. And I instinctually knew, although I could never put it into words, that those who were part of my life, who were in the role of guiding me, not just my parents, the teachers in the grammar school I went to, the clergy in the church that I went to, didn't really know what life was about. They had a belief system, and I was indoctrinated into that, but I always sensed that there was something that didn't feel right about that. I was an altar boy. Those friends of mine who were also raised Catholic, some of them were altar boys and can relate to this. Sometimes I would serve at the 7:00 Mass in the morning, and the priest would say Mass to an empty house. And maybe there were a handful of people in the church. And when it came time for the altar boys, there were 2 of us in cassocks to go over with cruets of water and wine. I distinctly remember being in the church with people who were pretty much asleep, not really paying attention. The priest giving me the eyeball and just nodding his head like, more wine, and just draining the cruet into the cup. I didn't really know what to make of that. Not every priest, of course, is lost, but I felt like they couldn't provide me with the kind of guidance that I really yearned for and didn't even know I yearned for. But you know what? We all grow up in the situations we grow up in, and we do fine, most of us, as adults. Some don't. Some end up having problems with drugs or any numbers of things, relationships. But most of us manage, get along, can pay the bills, but we don't live what is possible for us. That's how it seems to me, that there is so much more that is possible in many different arenas. So this ability to live and learn, it's still there, I feel. It's dormant in most of us. One thing that I learned as I grew up was how necessary a spiritual path is for me. I was so impacted when I first heard spiritual teaching, the Dharma, to use that Eastern phrase, spoken about in Western language, so I could understand it rather than all these Sanskrit words. How the mind works, how it identifies. For me, one thing that really impacted me was considering how pretty much all my activity is based in some form of trying to survive. Psychologically, by being acknowledged, oh, you exist, or being concerned about even little things that might go wrong and be threatening to my sense of myself. I just had never considered that before. I had just been reactive, as I think most of us are, machines in that way of describing things. And also, it really struck me that looking always to validate some form of separate existence can be debilitating, can be grueling to do that one's whole life. And I felt what I had done to that point was be that way without really reflecting on it. It also made sense to me that God is all existence. I don't want to get into religious dogma or anything, but it just made sense to me that all this is the divine manifest. And that underneath the way that I acted, the way that my mind worked, was an essential relationship to everything. We might talk about it in the terms of being prior to mind, that something exists prior to the separate individual. And I think that we've all had some kind of experience of that if we're on the path, and probably even if we're not. I could say that I verified that for myself, that there is a way of being that transcends this individual self-sense. Even if my experience of that has been only temporary, I knew it at the time that I was in that space. And it's informed my life pretty much. So I got involved with the spiritual school, and in that school, learning was experiential. So this is a different kind of class. The class is life. And I would never have learned what I ended up learning without that kind of a goad, just in terms of risk, for example. So I went to graduate school. I became a city planner. I had a very stable job. I could have stayed on that track for my whole life, but it was unfulfilling. I don't know why I felt that way, and some other people don't, about the track that they get on. But for me, I just couldn't stay on that track. But there was a big risk in moving across country and doing jobs that I never envisioned myself doing. Landscaping, selling vacuum cleaners. Really? I was groomed for another type of life. But there was some desire to live and not just exist, which prompted me to take this small leap. For me, it was a giant leap, and see what happened. I'd never done anything like that before. Sometimes we learn just by getting older just in terms of living and learning. I feel like I've learned to let my kids live their life. And I might have said that I was doing that so long ago, but I could sense when they felt like dad was trying to control things or guide them when they needed to find their own way. I also feel sometimes we get shocked into learning. So when my wife died, that was such a shock for me. And I feel like I'm in the process of learning how to move forward after the death of a partner. And I feel that there's an innate ability to learn to do everything that happens. And some of them are really quite challenging. So, to the point of the talk, something I've learned is that I need to learn to make the work my own. For me, what that means is not just to relate to it as a comforting philosophy or by engaging practice in some areas but not in others, but to go as deeply as I can into it, or as I'm willing to, and to be honest about how much I want to do that. And at the point that I'm at, I'm feeling like there's not all that much left to really live for, except to hold on to things I have, and that's not going to work. But it's not just that. I feel there's some possibility, but that involves going into the unknown. Because no matter how much I understand the Dharma or the teaching, really it's about letting go of everything and allowing what arises to direct things. That doesn't mean that life is going to change at all. Things might stay exactly as they are, but the context of it is not holding on. The same thing may continue to arise. So I'd like to ask, just to open it up just for a moment before I talk about the work or my understanding of it. What have you really learned in your life and on the path? Has anything occurred to you right now that you have really learned?
I think I have learned that there is a sacred, and it's a state that I want to be in.
Thank you. Anything? I mean, it can be mundane, it can be spiritual, whatever.
All this life is certainly a mystery to me, but I feel invited to participate in this mystery. And I keep looking for ideas or ways that might seem a little bit better. I might read it in this book or hear it from this person on the street, but I'm not always going back to some set of rules. I'm always moving forward, trying to find out what's going on. Where I am right now, attention is very important to me, conscious attention. And I know that it arises from the source, my source. And I know that this attention in me wants to have a relationship with this source, because I need to always remember that this attention and the source that it rises from is responsible for that life that I have today. So I feel a real obligation to give back to what was given to me in the beginning. So that's where I am right now. And then a year or so down the road, it'll be somewhere else. But I'll never retire, because this all just keeps coming on. I love it because I love truth. And I don't ever get tired of it. I want to learn more of it.
Thanks. So the title of the talk is Making the Work Your Own. So I think probably a few words about the work are in order. In first learning about spiritual teaching, some of which I described, at least the way that it came to me, I heard about the work. And the way it was discussed was in two ways. One, in terms of the Gurdjieff work. And I just looked in The Fourth Way by Ouspensky and came across this. I don't know if it's a definition, but a way that he speaks about it. Someone asks him what is meant by work, and he says, work in the sense we use this word in the system means work for acquiring knowledge and for the study of change of being. So there's lots of things to pull apart in just that statement. But there's a whole system that Gurdjieff taught that he referred to as the work. But also, another way of considering the work, at least the way I've learned about it, is in terms of the different traditions or streams of, well, let's say the great work. So obviously, there have been great realizers in Buddhism and Hinduism and Sufism, seems obvious to me, and Christian mystics, and different streams of the work that I think some consider to be exclusive. If they're part of one tradition, they don't consider other traditions so much. Their own is the path, the true path, maybe. But my understanding is that there are different streams of the work. They say different paths coming up the mountain, end up at the top, something like that. And acknowledging and respecting different traditions and kind of understanding the different ways that they approach the path has been helpful to me, just to get a broader perspective of what life is. So self-knowledge can be described in different ways: surrender, Buddha nature, essence, words like awakening, liberation, enlightenment. But it seems that those who have really understood bodily the path, somehow they have experienced some transformation of being into a context of love and service. I mean, love might not look anything like the way that we consider love, the way that a separate person looks for love for themselves. And service might be very different than the way that we consider service, like we're going to help out with something. It seems much bigger than that. It seems like service to humanity, or all that is, to the universe. I ask myself sometimes, do I want that? I don't really know what that is, but it seems to me like I'm being inexorably drawn to go deeper into what is real. And on my path, to draw no conclusions about how it's going to be. So I was talking to somebody recently, we were communicating about, like, on the different paths, effort is required. And I think surrender is required. To me, both. I mean, at least that's the way it's been on my path. There has been a lot of effort. And surrendering one's self-sense, one's ego sense, one's personality at some point after one makes great efforts seems to be the key. My teacher said that surrender is the key on my path. But I don't know that you get there without having developed will. So the emphasis is different on different paths. Regardless, why engage the work? And to me, it just seemed like life as it was is not enough. To seek comfort and security as it is valued in our society is just unsatisfying because it doesn't last. I've recognized that intellectually, but also in my body more and more. It's not sufficient. What is sufficient? Is anything sufficient? If we're truly connected to the work, however you define that, I think you've had a taste of freedom. I know that I have. In times when I've been to India, I don't know why, something about being out of my ordinary life circumstance in an unfamiliar situation. Sometimes I've just had that experience. I know the reality of that. So I want to keep going, but I'd ask you just for a minute to consider what your experiences have been of a taste of freedom. I think that when we have that, which I think is innate to everyone, in Buddhism, they say everything has Buddha nature. I think our instinctual response is that we've forgotten our true selves. And we have some sense of that. And that intellectual understanding is delusion, or it's just very partial. The work is about discovering our illusions.
I've been pondering the difference and the place of surrender versus will. And I think they are both there in every path. And I think they are there in life. I think that, to use the I Ching phrases, it would be the creative and the receptive, the yin and the yang. They exchange. Even a general in battle is not simply advancing to fight. He's also maneuvering and even retreating. So it makes perfect sense to me that both are required, no matter what your path is.
Yeah, I don't think it can be a real path if they don't have both. It's kind of what I've come to. In some Eastern traditions, there's the path of bhakti or devotion, or the path of knowledge or jnana, or the path of karma yoga about service and work. But I think that if you don't have both of these things going on, that some part of yourself is not open to transformation.
It's a balanced approach that's required. Each one is appropriate in its own place. Will and yielding.
And I think that the Gurdjieff work has really contributed something important in terms of self-observation. I think on all those paths, to just be devoted or to just have knowledge, to just be service-oriented without really being able to self-reflect and study oneself deeply, to really understand, not just theoretically, but to know oneself, how one operates. I think that we're not open to transformation actually happening in some ways that we're defended from. If I'm self-honest about my self-observation, I don't always like to see things about myself. When Karuna was here, when I was married, when she wanted to let me know about something, I didn't always just say, oh, thank you. So I get the idea that we're blind. I'm blind in certain areas. I get that in theory, but practically, do I really know that? So I was doing a landmark course many years ago while my teacher was still alive. The landmark grew out of Est. Werner Erhard started Est, and then it became landmark, and trainers and students of his continued the training. And I found a lot of value in that. And the initial training was very interesting and I think useful in coming at spiritual teaching, actually, but in a very different way. But the second course, which I decided to take, it was the advanced course. The teacher wasn't coddling people. And I raised some issue, I can't even remember what it was, with the facilitator. And this facilitator had been known to wield quite a Vajra sword. And she looked at me and she said, "You're uncoachable. Can't coach you." And this got back to my teacher. And he confirmed that. But it isn't so black and white. It's that there are certain areas that we're blind in. And we don't really know that we're so blind in those areas. May not even know that at all. And for me, my defensiveness about hearing things, about things that I've done, about my opinions. I mean, I could sense this in my reactions, and I was able to self-observe that, but maybe just to a small degree. And after that, which was so helpful, I really began more to just listen when people had anything to say to me. I can't say I do that perfectly, but over the years, I've really learned a lot more about being vulnerable and open to input, but also not taking what everyone says as the truth. What is the overall general response of the world or of the group that I'm part of? What is that communicating? To me, that's more trustworthy than maybe anyone's individual comments or perspective. But an individual's perspective might be right on the money too. But can I be with that? So let's consider that we just might be asleep, like they say in the traditions. What that means to me is that my mind is chattering away and I'm seeing a tiny sliver of reality because my mind is so focused on how my experience is relating to me. I don't see what's going on over here peripherally. I don't have field attention. And that's something that has really astonished me, to be in the presence of beings who I felt had field attention. I don't want to describe it in trite ways. It just seemed that someone who their ego was out of the way, had been transformed to that degree, was able to relate to the whole and not just to a sliver like I do of life. So if my attention is consumed with myself, that's what I understand to be sleep. Also, that I relate to the world through filters developed in childhood. So I really chafed at feeling controlled when I was a kid. So if anybody comes up to me, as people do all the time, and says, I have this idea, I think you should do this, there's one person who comes and tells me what I should do with some regularity or implies that. And I have some reaction to that. What I consider to be asleep involves that as well, not just being open to what the universe is presenting. I've found that engaging with others and with other opportunities that take me out of my comfort zone have really pushed the envelope a bit, and isn't always fun or comfortable in the moment, but sometimes it is when I find myself relating to things in a free way, growing beyond my habits. It just feels right. In the process of the work, I think we get to deal with all the elements of the world. We might refer to that as a tantric approach. Certainly, some traditions don't even consider the idea of tantra. That's just a foreign word, like surrender might be a foreign word in some traditions also. But my understanding of what that means is the non-rejection of anything, whatever life presents. So how do I relate with anger and competitiveness, with lust and sex, with grief and depression, with separative thoughts, with love and affinity, with all the elements of life? If I see some things about myself that I would rather not be there, maybe I think that something's wrong. But also over time, the work has taught me that when I'm relating with those things, the work might be going deeper, and that I can learn to love the different parts of myself because there are a reason that they were there and they're helping me to engage the work. One more thing about the work. The work isn't about being saved, as in Judeo-Christian traditions. I was raised to believe that that's what religion was about, and was kind of shocked to hear that the work was about, to use this language, sacrifice, or being used by the absolute or by God, and that it was possible to help God. How could I help God? I'm this insignificant creature in this vast universe, truly insignificant in some ways. In 30 years, who's going to remember any of this? Who's going to remember this talk? Nothing. But maybe God needs our help. So I'd never considered it that way, to actually accept that the universe doesn't make mistakes and to align with that. That doesn't mean that I'm always going to be happy, happy, happy. The dark comes with the light. And to be open and to be in relationship with that, to me, is the work. Or one way of describing the work. So, time for another question. Does any situation come to mind when you've had to work in order to see something you were blind to?
Going off on a tangent again, the work does hold that the absolute needs us. And a good analogy to think of how small and nothing we are is like a little seed. Sometimes it can take weeks to even sprout and weeks to become a few inches tall. But then at the end of the season, it's a giant vine. And so if we see our effort as being of multi-lifetimes and incarnations into higher and higher forms of life, even becoming a planet, and that would be only an intermediate step.
Our help is needed. We need our own work and help, but there's reciprocity in the system.
I think we're here to help in God's suffering. I believe God does suffer in the things that we see in our lives. But for me, the work now is my own self-observation into anger and commentary, but particularly anger, because this makes me feel unsettled and it separates me from other people. But annoyance and impatience really comes up quickly for me. And I really want to work on this because it keeps me from peace. I have my wife as my best teacher to say, calm down. But it takes a long time for this self-observation to kick in. I've had many times when I go back home and I see how I was angry in that particular situation. Sometimes it'll all of a sudden come up and I'll pull myself back from it because I can see where I'm going with this impatience or annoyance. And then sometimes I can stop it before it even gets here because I know it's going to be coming on and I want to put a stop on it before it becomes manifest. I think self-observation is one of the most important things that I can do in my life. It's just a part of my obligation to me for being here on earth, for the life that I've been given, to practice this idea of self-observation, to be aware of the things that I need to continue to work on, and to remember who I am also. So that's where my work is right now. But I'm doing pretty good with commentary. I hold my tongue a lot more than I ever did in the past. And I can tell you, it has been very difficult for me because I wanted to say something that I thought was very important, but probably not. Anyway, what about you? What is your work on?
My work is on learning to be alone. I mean, I got people all around me, but that's different than being in a relationship where there's emotional intimacy. I have to develop intimacy on a different level, in a different way than I had before. I had gotten emotional food as a man from that one source, my wife. And now that source isn't there. And how to hold that, that's a big part of my work now.
Mm-hmm.
and addressing issues that have come up with her passing that have been exposed that I did not know were there before, that have come to the foreground. And I can decide to just keep that away or really work with those things. So now, making the work your own. Thanks. This is actually part of what I wanted to consider in this last half hour or so. It's been clear to me that to really experience the truth of the path, we have to make the path our own, not just follow it without really looking at all the different parts of ourselves that are at play here in this life. Otherwise, it's theoretical. If I don't take this and make it my own, if I look at other people who have lived the work in different traditions and admire what they have done and not engage it myself, I don't mean like I'm going to push to make this happen so much. It's more a matter of an inner decision about what I want to do with my life. Because if I don't do that, I don't think it's possible to truly live the work. And part of this is the question, do I want to? Really, do I want to serve everybody, anyone who comes into my path that it feels like I should serve? Sometimes I'm working in my office, people come in and they just start talking to me about something. And I'm really busy doing something. And I can make boundaries. I could say, I can't talk right now. That's okay. But sometimes really, I'm so attached to what I'm doing that I can't just put it down easily. And I'm realizing more that right in the moment, it's really possible most times to just put this on the shelf for a minute and just be in relationship with this person. And that feels like the right way to practice. Practice is in the details. Things that aren't so major prepare the ground for more major things. And if I don't do that, I feel like it's like Werner Erhard said, eating the menu instead of the meal. So we all know a lot of things about the teaching. We've learned a lot and grown a lot. But to really have the feast, to really live life as a feast, I think I have to make the work my own and not just be a passenger that's being pulled along. I mean, in one way, we're all passengers being pulled along, but another way, to be responsible for the teaching as much as I know of it. That would be making the work my own. Seeing where I'm not surrendered. And it's okay. I don't need to push and try to surrender to this or so much. If I'm not going to surrender to this situation, just be honest about it. Or maybe I can surrender to it and be with this person who just showed up. Making the work one's own is more of a contextual thing. External activities are a reflection of the work, but they're not it. It's more about how I am in relationship to reality. One way of considering this is that we usually, I think, relate to the work from the context of the world. Like, I'm thinking about the work. I'm talking about the work right now. We relate to the work from the context of ego. I'm thinking about it, and this is how it applies to me, from a self-centered point of reference, rather than relating to the world or to my life from the context of the work, where there's majority vote, where I am really dedicated to living this, to living sacrifice or surrender, or however you would describe your relationship to the path. I do think that at some point there's majority vote to relate to the world from the context of the work rather than the reverse. So some considerations about living the work that have influenced me are discussed by Arnaud Desjardins, the French spiritual master, and my own teacher, Lee Lozowick, in this book, Words of Fire and Faith. This book, Words of Fire and Faith, I want to mention just because in the last few years of his life, the last 2 years of his life, Lee was dying of cancer, although he really never spoke about that. He was just doing his work. It sure seemed to me that he was just going ahead with that. He had a schedule. He was going to meet with people. He had projects that he was working on with people. He was teaching students. He was going ahead full out. And it's not like I would want to imitate that necessarily, like a baby sticking out its tongue. But there's something about that that communicates to me what the work actually is. It's possible to live a really good, fulfilling life, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally okay. What do I want to do at this point? I think I just want to move forward with what feels right. And one of those things is strengthening the container, continuing to try. So I raised this question: what issues have followed you all your life? I mean this rhetorically. Are there issues that have always been present and still are in your life? So continuing to try. And I really do think that at some point there's majority vote. And we can turn a corner and be different about those things. But they're very primal. To me, to make the work your own, I think you have to turn the corner. If you would identify what that would be, or some of those things, maybe just even one or two, that would be really life-changing, even though things might not look any different at all. Recognize that you've got a weak link and that you're only as strong as your weakest link. What is that for me? What is my weak link? There's this example that Arnaud uses of, here's a chain with all these different links, and they can hold 50 pounds of weight, but there's one link that can only hold 5. Well, if you put 10 pounds of weight on this chain, the chain will break. It doesn't take much. So I've seen in a bunch of different spiritual schools where really strong practitioners in a lot of areas have had a weak link. And the work is going to present our weak links to us. Circumstances where we're not clear, where we're still blind, where actually we still have a childish attitude. I think that might be a way to describe it. And I think it's important, Arnaud says anyway, it's important to look at those things without humiliation, to see the childish parts of ourselves without humiliation. For example, some questions might be, can I be alone? Can I be in solitude? And some people say, oh yeah, I really like to be alone. Well, that might be true. And there might be a lot more going on about that also, where we avoid things. And that's why we like to be alone. Another question would be, am I dependent on something for my happiness? If we're dependent on anything for our happiness, really that's childish in a way. And do I need to have things to be secure? Arnaud makes the distinction between having and being. Oh, you could still have things, but not need them to feel secure. It's a contextual thing. Making the work your own is about working on those contextual things. How to do that? I don't know. We have to figure it out. But if we're self-honest and willing to observe ourselves at deeper levels, even areas that we've been blind to, but sense there's something going on about, I think we can really go further on the path, a lot further. Otherwise, we might stay pretty much in the same place. So we can size ourselves up. In what areas do I need to grow up? And this is true of everyone. People can be famous, They can be billionaires, they can be pilots, surgeons, and emotionally be children. I think that that's how it is in the world. In some areas, we're more adult than in other areas. We might be 80% adult in one area and 80% child in some other area. To me, what I have learned about the work is that the way to work with these things is to learn to love that part of yourself, because all of us were wounded as children, and that's where that all came from, as a way of learning to protect ourselves. Seems like to me anyway. I'm pretty confident about that. And if we don't do that, I don't think it's possible to make the work alone, because we remain divided. Part of us is okay, part of it's not okay. And if we're going to try to overcome this thing by an effort of will exclusively, how's that been your whole life? Self-compassion, which does not mean indulgence, opens the door. So what can help? I don't know, many forms. In the school that I'm in, there's so much that's irreplaceable in terms of help. But sometimes I feel like Ginny Matthews said during one of her recent talks, she's a Buddhist, was a student of Sasaki Roshi's. She said that in some areas I've gone outside of my community for help. And that's been important for me too. People who can really understand a certain thing that I've experienced have been very helpful to me. Taking initiative to put myself on the line if I feel drawn to do something. So there's this Baul Mela. My tradition is called the Western Baul tradition. Without going into that in a lot of detail, there is a gathering of people from East and West with that orientation. And it was in Canada. And it was really a stretch to go, but I felt I should go. To just go out there and not know what was going to happen. And I just followed my instincts about that. And it was so valuable. What happened, I couldn't have imagined previously. There was a lot of work value. I received a lot and gave a lot. Everything is reciprocal. This is something from Arnaud Desjardins. And this is really a challenge. Work with loving what you do not love. Love your enemies, the unfavorable parts of life. And we can talk about that theoretically, but so many things happen during the day. I just dropped something on the floor. Oh, I have to go and pick that up. I'm like not really feeling good about that. I can't force myself by an effort of will to feel differently, but I can really learn to accept the unfavorable parts of life more and more. Arnaud Desjardins says that if one begins to really practice with this, changes will happen so much faster than would if one does not practice with that. If we only practice with the things that we want to practice with, we only surrender to the things we want to surrender to. Interact and stay in relationship with everybody. Get off holding any grudge immediately, as soon as you realize it. No grudges at all. To support others in their work. Oh my gosh. In a spiritual school, people have all different kinds of jobs, and there's tensions between them. But can I support everyone in their work? Holding our seat. If you have a particular job, to hold that, but also not be territorial about it. Like, this is my job. Oh my God. Deal with pride and vanity. Deal with it now. Oh, and lust. I read this thing. What is lust if not needing to fill a hole in oneself? So how to work with that? Where does my attention go with the internet? There's this saying, prana or life force follows attention. And one of the things that we can be really habitual about is how we place our attention. What's not healthy in the ways that we do that? Well, what is habitual? What keeps the self-sense in place, the assemblage point in place by the way we place attention mechanically? And a lot of times we do that, we do things to feel better because we're holding a lot of stress and we keep acting out. People smoke, people eat too much. There's a whole array of ways that we do that. But what's underlying that is something to work with. And part of that is working with my attention. I think it's a very gradual process. A couple other things. Following the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Oh my gosh. Somebody that I know did something that I really don't agree with. I really don't agree with it. But a higher principle for me was to stay in relationship with this person and to realize that it's this person's work, not mine. And also that I don't really know for sure. This is my opinion. This is what I think. But the spirit of the law is not to judge. Don't separate the world from spiritual life. Like, how do I treat people at the checkout counter? How do I treat somebody who cuts me off on the road? I might have this initial reaction, but I could say to myself, oh, maybe this person is struggling with something. What does it matter? Be generous with time and money. One of the sentences that's in one of these essays in Words of Fire and Faith is, demands for service are notoriously unconcerned with our personal wishes. And we still have needs. I really think that sometimes you got to make boundaries. And maybe you can't do something. Or it's just not right to do that. But also, that can be an excuse because I just don't want to be hassled doing something when somebody needs me or when somebody needs something. The work is about service to what comes to me. Do I want to make that my own? Don't reach. I think that the work is about doing something. It's more about being. To me, it's see what comes. And then if it feels right, act. Go for it. Oh, I was reading something about the Gurdjieff work, and it involves really engaging. And I think that surrender can be engaging something. It's not like not doing anything. It's surrendering to the essential impulse that comes to us. Keep agreements and even go beyond that. To me, if somebody sends me an email, I'm going to send them an email back, even if it's kind of a hassle to do because that person contacted me. Other people may look on things differently. I'm not saying that all these things everybody should do. For me, this is what making the work my own is. The work is about relationship between you and God. This is such an important thing to me. There's no intermediary in a way anymore. There's me and there's God. There was my wife, there was my teacher, and somehow now with them not being alive in their bodies, I'm realizing that it's me and God. I can't say I've totally realized that or anything, but it's really coming to me that in the end, I'm going to be on my deathbed, and probably then I'm going to really realize that. But I'm dying right now. That reality is present right now, and it's always been. Do I want to make the work my own? Cultivating emptiness when it arises. In meditation, emptiness isn't depression. Emptiness is freedom. When my ego isn't jabbering away. Developing surrender and relaxing some attachments. I come home, I go out to the gym, and the first thing I want to do is check my cell phone. Well, that's okay. But I can feel that there's some tension, some reaching. Maybe I can just leave it. go and have lunch and then check my phone. Small details that seem insignificant, I think they strengthen the container. Because in the end, surrender is not something that one does, but something that happens when ego is no longer present. Okay. Thanks for listening. I know that was a lot, but for me, it's relevant.
Making my spiritual work my own, it just seems to happen. Life unfolds and I learn and grow. So that's my path. And we're talking earlier about God needing us. And my word is life needs us. We need each other. And I really feel that, especially now during these times, that life is calling for even more from us. That's what I experience, that I'm being called by life just to be kind and compassionate, certainly with myself and with everyone that I meet at the grocery store or wherever. And that's my path, part of my path right now. I don't know tomorrow what life is going to call me to do or how to be, but that is the surrendering to meet it, to not avoid it, even if it's things that I don't like, just to meet it with as much openness and kindness that I'm capable of.
Thank you. I think I will end with a quote from Lee Lozowick about the work in a broad sense, from Words of Fire and Faith. The work is an alchemy of consciousness that turns the base metal of illusion, the world of dreams, the tin and iron of lies, denial, fantasy, and myth, into the pure and priceless gold of surrender.